Okay, so here's something that people are talking about. A piece on NBC News looks into how true crime went from being fringe to mainstream. So why do you think the genre fascinates so many people? And we kind of have a true crimey expert here with us. Lauren, weigh in on this.
Listen, yes, I am a bit of a true crime buff slash podcaster, true crime and cocktails. We'll get to that, but I really do have a lot of thoughts on this. First of all, the timing of it feels to me like it could be pandemic related. I think a lot of us are facing our own mortality. I think that feels like a direct connection, obviously, in many ways. But I actually heard someone take a really interesting take on this on TikTok, and I wish I could credit her because this is not my original thought. But I thought she had some really interesting points that because true crime traditionally has a very strong female audience, I can say that from my podcast analytics, we're at about 86% women as our listeners, 2% non-binary. And she was talking about how true crime, she believes for women, this is a theory, validates our experience, meaning that from the time we're children, our experience as women is one where you're taught, don't trust strangers. Always be aware of your surroundings. Put your keys between your fingers when you're walking at night. Don't be alone. There's always this kind of feeling of the violence that can very quickly befall, very sadly, many women and many people, obviously in the LGBTQ2S+ community. And so I really thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, because if you think about it through that lens, it does kind of just validate that our experiences, our fears, the ways that we've had to kind of learn to navigate the world since childhood, it really does make those fears feel like they were real and that you're not just, crazy. It's not in your head. And then at the same time, I also think it's interesting looking at it from the other side, because a lot of men, again, this is anecdotal in my life, I'm not saying across the board, but I know personally men that are like, I don't really love true crime. And perhaps through this lens, it's for the same reason, that it validates this kind of experience of violence and, that experience that a lot of women tend to have at the hands of men throughout their lives. I thought that was a really interesting take on why true crime has become something that is resonating, especially so deeply with women.
Yeah, and it's not a new thing. In many ways, it feels like maybe new because, like you said, pandemic life, it's everyone's very, very concentrated sitting at home, and then you get wrapped up into like a series, like, I don't know, Making the Murderer, for example. But my love of true crime, because I love it, goes all the way back to Unsolved Mysteries. Remember Robert Stack? The creepiest voice and the creepiest show music in history. Remember this guy? And I would watch, and even though the show title was Unsolved Mysteries, you were always left wondering, like, how did it end if they left something dangling? And so that's where, for me, that was like, I think 80s. They thought it was going to be just like a filler in the schedule. I think it was NBC or CBS. And then all of a sudden it blew up. And that was like late 80s. And so for me, I think you also have a generation of people like me that started watching that stuff, got scared to death as a young person, and you still have this fascination, but now it's going into, we can actually solve crimes this way. And that show, and actually many others that have really blown up, you actually have this whole generation of people who are playing armchair lawyers and murder investigators, all while watching and listening along to the podcasts like yours, Lauren, and the shows. And that is now a fascinating evolution of true crime that I think really is fascinating.
Don't they always, Mel, like it was like always like in a sleepy little town where nothing ever happened.
Right.
And they just set up this kind of like, it could happen to you too. I think that's what drew us in. And Lauren, I think your insights are right on. I think a lot of women are trying to figure out, how to prevent something like this happen using some clues. It's also like a constant warning tale of like, be careful about what husband you choose, because oftentimes it was always a money problem or an affair that led to this thing. So that was unnerving. I used to watch them, but I can't. After having Jaya, my son, I feel like it changed the way I related to that. I can't find, and it's always been a bit problematic, let's be honest, to find entertainment value with something that happened in real life. Like, I think I kind of just brushed that aside for a while, and now I'm finding it harder and harder. Do you know what I mean, Lainey?
Mm-hmm. I do. And you know what? The example for that is just one of. the JonBenet Ramsey case, right?
Yes.
Like, there are a lot of people still super invested in what happened to her, who did it. You know, some people are obsessed with the idea that it could have been the family, even though there is a lot of evidence that there was not the family. And listen, it touches on a lot of fears, right? The women's fears, as Lauren, you were saying, but also family fears. Like, everybody's worst nightmare is for your child to go missing in your house in the middle of like the night. But I mean, and I don't want to sound insensitive in the sense of course, I think it was such a tragedy that this happened. And yet I don't have that level of like, I'm devoting energy and hours of my week figuring out what happened to JonBenet Ramsey. But there are people out there who do. Like, Lauren, you can confirm this. I'm sure you can.
It is and that one.
Right?
Yes.
Is that invasive? So to your point, right. So the number one, as you said. So to your point, Cynthia, the line between invasive and entertainment, that's where it gets a little bit blurred. Because, like, really, she wasn't our little girl, right? And anyway, it's very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Time Magazine wrote a great article, though, that in all this true crime bubbling up again, it is re-traumatizing a lot of very real people and families. So definitely something to consider there.